on all the pistons right now, do it now, are pointed towards the flywheel. And as you can see, one arrow there, and they do indeed point towards the flywheel. And likewise on this side here too. Okay, so now next thing to do is install cylinder heads. I like to start with the number 3/4 side. Use the best cylinder head for the number 3/4 side. And you got to tip the engine up to do that and actually rotate things a bit. But now when you rotate the engine, make sure that the pistons, the cylinders, don't slide out far enough to uncover some of the rings. You have to then use the ring compressor to put them back on again. Rotate the engine a bit to where no pistons are top dead center. Put the engine in almost a vertical position here. And now we'll go show you how to put the heads on. Assemble the cylinder heads. These are the cylinder heads we just saw having had a valve job. We've enlarged the ports here to take the Solex intake manifolds for the Weber conversions. Put in brand new exhaust and intake valves. We surfaced the cylinder head so it's all nice and clean. And we cleaned up the one cylinder head that had the chunk piston. Apparently this engine had been overhauled twice before, once when it spun a rod bearing on the lower end and once when the piston chunked, probably after it spun the rod. We smoothed that over. We use this on the number 1/2 side, which is under more benign conditions than the 3/4 side. So this is the head we will use on the 3/4 side. We have 8 new pushrod tubes. Note the new ones have the 1-inch extension here that protrude into the case side, not the head side. That's to prevent oil from slinging up into the head through the pushrod tubes and you go around a corner. What we'll do now, you get out our 16, the red ones are the best. These are the seals for the pushrod tubes, little trapezoidal type seals. I like the red ones the best, the green ones the second best, and the black ones the least, but the black ones work fine too. We get out 8 head bolt or head nut O-ring seals here. 2 of the retaining rings are the for the air deflectors on both number 3/4 and 1/2 side. And note the air deflectors are somewhat different. That one has a square cutout, one has a oval shaped cutout. Square cutouts for the hex head of the through bolt, and the round cutout is for the acorn nut side. Now note if you put the through bolt in the wrong way, then these air deflectors will not function right. And they are somewhat different, so you do have to put them on the right way, which means you have to put the through bolt on the right way. So what we'll do now is show you how to put the seals on the pushrod tubes. Now since we're putting shims under the cylinders, it's usually best to wiggle and pull on the convolutions here of the pushrod tube, and the big end with the extension gives you more meat to grab onto. We want to enlarge them a little bit so they can compress and therefore seal right. So we take our finger, dip it in the secret sauce, grab a trapezoidal seal, put it over the one side of the pushrod tube, grab another seal, lubricate as we do so. The old big bore kit box serves as a good place to store all these things out of the way. And we will then do this on all 8 pushrod tubes. Now we probably won't bore you with showing all 8 pushrod tubes here, but you get the general idea. It's a fairly simple, straightforward thing to do. It doesn't take much time. And the oil is used on the trapezoidal seals simply because it allows them to move around a bit inside. And when you do that, don't forget to expand the pushrod tube slightly here. As I talk, my mouth sometimes gets in the way of my brain. So expand them, make sure they're straight afterwards. Make sure the seal doesn't come off. Get the seal down fairly snugly against things. Now you can reuse use pushrod tubes, but if you ever had a pushrod tube leak on you, and you have to take the cylinder head off to repair it, you won't ever use used pushrod tubes again. You will only use new ones. I've never had a leak so far, knock on wood, with a set of new pushrod tubes. I have seen new pushrod tubes bent where they come from the importers with defects, but you inspect it, inspect the seam, inspect the convolutions, inspect the ends for being bent or whatever. And if they are bent, reject them as they're hard to fix, so they can be fixed. Anyhow, I got all the seals on the pushrod tubes. There are, of course, 8 pushrod tubes, 16 seals. and they go on fairly easily without any problem. Note that the beveled edge goes like so. Don't put it on the wrong way. That's supposed to go against the bevel in the cylinder head. And don't forget the long end, the 1-inch long extension, goes into the case side, not the head side. Okay, now we really should have taken off the head bolt washers, head nut washers, before we plated everything. But if you're careful with a screwdriver, if you're not careful with a screwdriver, you'll end up with stabbing yourself in the hand. You can pry off the old seal. Should have taken these things off before we plated everything. But sometimes in the excitement of doing an engine, or an engine overhaul tape, that you sometimes forget to do the little bitty things. But it doesn't matter if you do get them back after they're plated. The only problem is that these seals can be sometimes very hard and therefore very difficult to remove. When you first take them off the engine, you'll find they're not too terribly hard and they can be removed fairly easily at that time. After they go through the stripping solution, through the plating solution, they usually become very hard and brittle and not very nice to play with. Okay, you take the O-ring seals from the top end gasket set, lubricate them, slide them over, get them into the groove of the wide brim head bolt seal, these type here. The middle head bolts do not have a groove on the earlier engines. On the later 912s, there's a groove on them too for somewhat better support of the stud, alignment really of the stud. This top piece here serves to align the stud in the center, and that does provide for a better stud location. If the stud touches the cylinder, the heat of the cylinder, temperature of the cylinder, tends to heat the stud up and provide for a weaker, allow the higher the temperature of the iron of the stud, the less the mechanical properties, and therefore it may stretch a bit, and you don't really want to have that happen. So these head bolts are actually designed to align the stud a bit. In fact, we should arrange this, make sure the cylinders are arranged such that the stud protrudes through the hole, the center of the hole, and does not touch any part of the cylinder itself. Okay, we've got the O-ring seals on everything. Grab 2 push rod tubes that you like. Put on the clips that hold the air deflectors in place. They just snap on. They have a little semicircular piece here. Make sure you put them on the end that has the extension on it, like so. And get out your blue Loctite. We use blue Loctite on the head bolts, head nuts. Put a drop on each of the head nuts. I've sometimes used red Loctite way back when, and boy, it does work. I mean, those head nuts don't come loose. They pull the studs out of the case before they'll break loose. At least in about half the situations, half the studs. The blue Loctite allows for good torque readings and will maintain everything fairly snugly, but can be retorqued if you have to, and can be broken loose when you want to get the head back off without having the studs come out. The stud does come out. All you have to do is, once you get the nut off of it, take 2 17mm across the flat nuts, kind of the ones that hold your 4 studs in the engine to the transaxle, and double nut them against the stud, put a little red Loctite on the stud where it goes in the case, and then tighten the stud back into the case. Of course, by a stud removal tool, which is very nice, cam activated device. Snap-on has them, I think, for about $15 or so, that allow you to remove studs very nicely. Okay, now we'll get up and we'll stick everything on here, so be there in a second. Now, how do you want this arranged? Okay, before we install the head, take a rag and go around and clean off the sealing surface of the cylinder of any oil or crud or whatever that might be on it. Usually something, usually oil from where we just installed the pistons and cylinders. Clean off also the beveled area of the case where the pushrod tubes will go in. Get out your secret sauce. Lubricate that bevel area of the head where the pushrod tubes go in. I know we lubricated the washers on the, or the seals on the pushrod tubes, but it helps to lubricate that too. get out one of the push rods, tubes with the spring on it, retaining clip. Get out the air deflector. Do a trial test of fitting the cutout over the through bolt washer. And sometimes you'll find that the case washer will actually touch this edge here, which it's doing in this situation. In that case, take a mill file and just give it a few little touches like that. Do it on both sides. And that will allow it not to touch the washer and to rest a little flatter. You don't want this air deflector to protrude above the side of the cylinder. It may hit the head and prevent the head from sealing right, though I've never really seen that happen. Take your pushrod tube with the spring on it. Make sure the seam, the weld seam, let's get a close-up of this weld seam here, if we can. That weld seam is the most likely place for a leak, so put that up vertically, so even if it does crack or leak or something, it won't really leak. If it's down below, horizontally, it will in fact leak, so keep it vertical. Put it in to the hole. Arrange the spring so the spring fits into the crotch of the air deflector. Push it down like so. Get out 3 more pushrod tubes. Make sure the long extension is into the case and the seam is up. Make sure the seals are installed too. Like there. Get out, since this is the 3/4 side, get out your cylinder head. That's the best one, or better one of the two. Take your secret sauce, lubricate the beveled area in the head where the pushrod tubes will seal. Doesn't take much, just a drop or so per hole. Arrange the head over the studs of the case. Push it down gently. Now arrange all 4 pushrod tubes so they will in fact stick into their appropriate positions in the head. Tap it around a little bit. One thing you should do before you do anything else, of course, is take a magnet, put a magnet down through each of the holes of the head with the head off to make sure there is no washer, head bulb washer, down inside any of the holes. We've done that already. But take a magnet and stick it down with the head off the engine. Otherwise the stud will just grab the magnet. You won't be able to tell. Do it on all 8, but these 4 ones here are the most critical. There's an extra head bulb washer down here, and you put one of the regular head bulb washer on. You have 2 on the same stud. It'll raise the stand out enough to where the valve adjustment goes to hell, and the valve, you have oil leaks. It's a real mess. Anyhow, these are the head bulb washers here now. I like to buy new ones for the lower row and use the used ones on the upper row since they're much less critical. So what you do is you take 4 new head bolt or head nut washers. I like to have the bevel on the top side. Take a screwdriver and play B-52 over Moscow, dropping them down the screwdriver. Put the screwdriver on the center of the stud, and then drop the washer down around the stud. Tap it to make sure it's down all the way. Take the 4 used and replated head bulb washers and use them for the top side. Top side less critical, but it's non-trivial, so do use good head bulb washers. The previous clown that rebuilt this engine used A-type case washers, copper case washers, not steel. They're much thinner than the head bulb washers are. They're the wrong ones. He obviously ran out of things and didn't know where to get them. In case you have a problem, let the Maestro know. He'll solve it for you. Get 3 of the wide brim head bolts and 1 of the narrow brim head bolts. 1, 2, 3 wide brim, 1 narrow brim. The brim refers to the diameter here. The arrangement is wide brim goes to the right-hand middle hole, and then the wide brim also goes on either end. The non-wide brim, narrow brim, goes in the left-hand middle hole. It doesn't matter which of these small head bolts you put in the top row. They are all the same. In fact, these head bolts are used for mounting the starter on a 911, so they actually still did use them in the 911 series. Get out your 10mm Allen and your favorite socket wrench. Tighten things down slowly. And you do it in the following order, as I'm doing it here. There's various alternate orders as described in Secrecy in Your Circle, and I actually alternate between the alternate orders to make the head torque down evenly without favoritism on one particular side or the other. You don't really torque it down at all here as you're doing this. You're just getting them semi-snug. You then come back to the middle one again, right-hand middle wide brim head bolt, tighten it down some more, go around to all the others in turn. And after this, I'm going to show you a special trick. That special trick will allow your engine heads to seat in much better than normal. I can't take full responsibility for this. I actually got the trick from How to Hot Rod Volkswagen Engines about a long, long time ago. Gee, I hate to admit how long ago that was. But it does seem to work nicely, and I do use it. So you get these things down to about, 10 foot-pounds or so. You make sure that the head bolt seals are sealing, that the head bolt's not sticking out too far or down too far. If it's out too far, it means there's probably another washer hiding down below. If it's in too far, that shouldn't be the situation, unless you left out the head bolt washer. Now here's a trick. Before you torque these things down, rotate the engine and put the head on the 1-2 side. Clean off the top of the cylinder sealing surface. The reason why you want to do this, put on the other head before you torque down the first one, is that way you can alternate the torque between the heads, and as the one head torques down, these studs stretch. And they can actually stretch and distort the case a little bit, and it may affect the other head. If you torque alternately on the head, you'll accommodate that stretch, and they prevent leaks between the head and the cylinder that way. All right, so pardon my movement here. Get out the secret sauce. Pour a little, or take your finger and put a little secret sauce on each of the pushrod tube bevels. Get out the pushrod tube with the air deflector. Check to make sure air deflector will miss that washer. This time it does. We don't have to really cut it out. Make sure the seam is up. It is. Stick everything in place. Get out the remaining 3 pushrod tubes. Seam up in every case, like that. Find the seams. Sometimes there are things that look like seams. They're drawing marks on the tube. They're not seams. The welded seam is fairly obvious once you get to see it. Take your the head that's the less good of the two. Put a little bit of secret sauce on it, on the beveled area where the washers seal. Make sure everything's kosher. Take the head, stick it down over the top of the studs. Arrange the pushrod tubes so they fit through the appropriate hole in the head. Tap it down. Get your screwdriver and the 4 new head nut washers. Play B-52 over Moscow. Put the 4 washers over, 1 to a stud. Tap them down with a screwdriver. Get out the 4 used and replated head nut washers. Put them in. Push them down. Get out the remaining 4 3 wide brim, 3 and 1 narrow brim head nuts. Narrow brim goes on the left of the middle 2. Get out the 4 small head nuts, stick them on the top. Make sure you stick the hex head so it's up so you can get the wrench on it. Snug down the nuts. Look at your pushrod tubes, make sure nothing funny is happening with them. They're all in place. Correctly arranged, seams up. Torque, well, don't torque, just snug down the nuts. Not even tight. Take a couple of passes to do this. You want to creep up on bringing the head into contact with the cylinders so everything is done kind of smoothly and easily. Don't just want to lean on one particular nut to get it all down. You want to bring everything down evenly and happily, like a nice landing on an airplane. You don't want to hit the ground hard. You want to come in for a nice smooth landing. Right. All right, after you've gotten things snugged down, now's a good time to rotate the engine to horizontal position. Get out your torque wrench. Set the torque wrench to 15 foot-pounds initially, and torque in the pattern that's listed in secrets of the inner circle. Like I say, alternate between two torque patterns. If you follow this carefully, you can see which ones they are. You start at the middle and then work your way out to the outer head nuts, like that. Once you reach 15 foot-pounds on this head, go over to the other head. This is the trick. Torque the other head down to 15 foot-pounds. There's going to be a lot of crossing back and forth here, but that can't be avoided. Get to do a little bit of walking around your engine stand when you do it this way. Bring the torque up to 20 foot-pounds. Go back to the original side you began with and torque things to 20. Now the factory stock spec for torquing the cylinder heads is 22 foot-pounds. But I found that generally that's not quite enough torque to torque the heads to. So what I like to see is somewhere between 25 and 27 foot-pounds. We've done that side to 20 foot-pounds, now we'll do this side to 20 foot-pounds. If you go much beyond 27 foot-pounds, the washer, the head nuts start to strip. I never pull a stud out of a case of a Porsche engine, unlike VWs that pull studs all the time. Porsche case is aluminum, much better, much stronger than the stupid VW magnesium material, except for the new 411 post-1972 buses that the VW made out of aluminum. But I find that about 25 foot-pounds is about as far as you want to go. That's about 10% higher than stock torque. And that seems to work pretty well. The head nuts don't strip. The studs don't strip. The head does not dig in too much to the cylinders, like it will if you go much higher than that. And everything seems to work. It's about 10% higher than the factory recommended torque on the head of 22 foot-pounds. I like to use 25 foot-pounds. And that seems to be the happy medium that I've discovered over the years. All right, that's 25 foot-pounds on that side. Come back to number 3 and do it again. Actually, it's the first time for number 3 at 25. After we reach the 25 foot-pound torque, we will repeat the torque 3 times on each head, alternating between heads. Like I say, the Porsche gods like 3 times. Seems to be the magic number of the ancients. And it does seem to work. In fact, I found that the second time through, you sometimes get a few studs that move a little more than you'd expect. Like that one there moved a bit. That one didn't. That one moved just a little. That one didn't. If you keep alternating this torque, you can give it a few minutes between torques too to allow the stud to relax a little bit, if it's going to. And when you do an even torquing pattern like this, it really tends to make the engine run better. Now, I know on American V8s and things, you're supposed to retorque the heads after the engine's fired up. Porsches are very seldom, if ever, retorqued, because you have to take the intake manifold off to get to the top row. A lot of guys would tell you they retorqued their heads after the engine's been fired up, are probably lying, or else they just retorqued the lower row, which they can get to by taking the rocker stand off. And retorquing just the lower row may make things worse, not better. So I find if you torque it this way, with the blue Loctite on the nuts, and do it 3 times in succession, that's as good as retorquing after the thing is warm. It really isn't quite, but like I say, nobody retorques these things after they've been fired up. it's too much hassle to take off the intake manifold to get to these, and the cylinder shrouds to get to these top nuts. So we're about done now. I know this isn't terribly exciting, but at least if you do this, you'll have certainly a feeling of accomplishment. And now the engine is reaching its, to me, prettiest stages. Prettiest stages is when the rockers are on, the rocker cover is on, fuel pump and things like that are on, but before the sheet metal is put on. I find that is the nicest mechanical looking aspect of a Porsche engine. Now we have the heads on. If you want to make sure that you've done this job correctly, take the flywheel and spin it over. It'll be a little hard to spin. You can use a wrench on the pulley nut, friction of the rings on the new cylinders. You can put your finger, your thumb, over the cylinder and do a little compression test. And if you do it, it doesn't matter if you do it on compression or vacuum. If you do it on vacuum, it sucks. If you do it on compression, it blows because there's no valve operating mechanism. All the valves are closed. And you see how well it can hold vacuum or compression. And as you hear, it does pretty well. Also, by cranking it over, you're making sure that no piston is hitting the head, which it won't with the fixed shim in place. If you want to be certain, you can take a piece of solder, about 1/8 inch solder, put it down through the spark plug hole, crank the engine over, and see how much the solder is compressed when the piston comes up at top dead center. I know you won't have any problem with this. I've checked it before. It will have over 1 millimeter deck clearance between any part of the piston and the head because of the number of shims used and the way that which heads they are. Okay, next step is to put on the rocker train. And again, I like to start with the number 3 side. Number 3 side, I use the best components for, and then the rest of the components, the ones that are second best, go on the number 1, 2 side. That's because number 3 runs the hottest. You want to have the best stuff there. So let me get that set up for you, and we'll be back in a moment. Now we're going to put the rocker stands on. To do that, we need 6 of the 15 millimeter across the flat bolts. These are 10 millimeter bolts. We need special washers. These washers are 10 millimeter washers, but they have a small outside diameter. There are others that have bigger outside diameter, and those washers should not be used. They're kind of like this. The reason why they should not be used is the intake rocker stand will hit the edge of the washer and not sit flat against the stand. We need a 15 millimeter wrench and our torque wrench. Note that there's a little cutout on these, about like so. That's for a pushrod tube to come through. It also tells you which side these things go on. But they only go on one way, because if you didn't put the head bolts in right, you won't be able to get this bolt in. The wide brim head bolts have a tapped area for the 15 millimeter bolts to go in. So you set the better of the 2 rocker stands on the number 3, 4 side. Grab 3 of the bolts, 3 of the washers. Put the washers on the bolts. Put the bolts in. Screw them down a few turns, like so. Get out your favorite little ratchet. I CAD plate these bolts too. You don't have to. You never see them, but I like to CAD plate all the hardware in an engine. It makes for a much better appeasement to the gods. They like to see that too, and they can see in areas where you can't. So it's nice to make them happy. Torque them down to where they're snug. Get out your torque wrench that you just used. Remember, you torqued the head to 25 foot-pounds, and the torque on these bolts is 29 foot-pounds. So it's not far away from the 25. And get out your torque wrench, set the torque to 29. You don't really have to creep up on these, but you can if you want to. 1, 2, 3, helps to check them. 2, 3. At this point, you can flop the engine over to the other side. Put on the other rocker stand. Again, it only goes on one way. And put the remaining 3 10 millimeter bolts in place. 356 normals we'll use a cast iron stand held only at the outer extremities by a bolt here and a bolt here. And they're 17 millimeter across the flat rather than 15. You can actually use 17s in these two positions, but there's no need to. If you've taken apart the same engine, you should have all the right bolts for it. But if you get some Volkswagen shop that specializes in Porsches, watch out, you can have almost anything in here. Put a 17 millimeter across a flat bolt there, you never get the rocker stand, the intake rocker stand in place. So get them snug, and then get out the torque wrench and torque them down. And now you have installed both intake rocker stands. You can use blue Loctite on these too, but I've really never had one come loose. Crank the engine back over to number 3/4 side and get out your cleaned parts for the benign cleaner. Remember now, we had a couple of rockers that were in fairly, well, they had a few pits on them. They weren't bad. They had a few pits. So you take a mill file, medium mill file, and surface them by doing about 100 strokes this way. Try and pivot the rocker at the same time you're filing to get the same type of curvature the rocker has on it. And after about 10 minutes of this, you'll find that you've actually got a fairly smooth rocker, which we have here, because I've been doing this for a while. These are very hard to machine. You have to have a special jig to machine them. And your local machine shop, I guarantee you, won't have them. I save the old rockers up, and eventually we'll redo all the old rockers when we run out of good used ones, and we have a good supply of them, so it'll be some time. This gives you the idea. And we've already done most of the work here for you, so you don't have to worry. They're now in pretty good shape. So what you do is, helps to use the old big bore kit box. Again, comes in handy for lots of things. You grab a new paper towel, and you grab, say, 4 push rods, or you can use all 8. Can of WD-40, put the WD-40 with the nozzle into the oil hole of the push rod, blow it out until what comes out is clear WD-40. We've cleaned all these things in nice benign cleaner, so they are fairly clean now. You got to blow out the old cleaner and any other crud that exists. Make sure the passageways are clean, and that you have a complete connection between one end of the push rod tube and the other. Now, a good way to check, set this aside for a moment, the push rods themselves are not bent, is to roll them on a flat surface. If they roll fairly smoothly without the ends describing a circle, they are fairly unbent. They may twist, but they shouldn't roll with the ends describing a circle. These are all pretty good. So you clean them off. Now here's if you have a can of STP or a can of oil, or a bottle of oil, you can let one sit in the oil, get some oil up in the push rod, and then pull it out, bring it over quickly, put it down into the push rod tube hole, wiggle till you feel it fall down inside the cam follower. Now don't get it resting on the lip of the cam follower, that's why you want to have the engine vertical. Put another one in the oil can, wiggle it till you feel it fall inside the cup of the rocker. You get the push rod on the edge of the rocker, you'll have a heck of a time adjusting the valve, and then when you do adjust the valve, it'll probably plop down inside the rocker at some point, and all of a sudden your valve gap will become about 1/4 inch. Not quite, about 1/8 of an inch, but you get the idea. Clean them off, dip them in the oil, let some oil get up inside the push rod. It'll probably run out anyhow, but at least it gives you a psychological feeling of doing the right thing. Put it in like so. Okay. Now to deal with the rockers themselves, these other 4 push rods we'll deal with when we go to the other side. What we do is we take a rocker, this is an exhaust rocker, clean it off, take some WD-40, stick the nozzle into the adjustment screw nozzle and blow. And you'll see the oil, WD-40, come out the inside of the rocker. Blast it all off really nicely. Now there should be a little oil hole here, right, like so. If we're lucky, we'll even see some oil coming out of there, some WD-40 coming out of there. This oil hole squirts oil onto the intake valve spring area. And you should make sure they're open, like so. Now the factory, when they did an engine, a new engine, left these open and told the dealer to plug these after the engine broke in, because otherwise you can sometimes throw too much oil on the intake valve spring and cause complaints of smoking from the customer. I like to use only open oil hole rockers. I find it works better. It may smoke a little more after a while when the valve guides wear, but so what? It's not too terrible. And it lubricates things. So you set that aside and you go the next one, do the same thing with it. Blast it all out all over. Make sure the oil hole is open as best you can. Okay. Clean it off and set it aside. Now the long rockers, the ones we just did, go one to a side. These are the short exhaust rockers. The other long exhaust rockers are used one to each side, like I was saying. The short exhaust rockers also have an oil hole there. There we go, now it's clear. And the exhaust rockers are generally in pretty good shape, though occasionally they do pit too, or they'll score on the inside. But these are all fairly decent. The intake rockers, here's one we treated. You do the same thing. Blast it out. You can rotate the adjustment screw usually sometimes to get better angles on things. Clean it all out really well. This is a rocker we reconditioned. We'll put that on the number 1-2 side. We use the good rockers on the 3-4 side. So you blast them all off. This is a good rocker, unpitted. We'll save that. We'll put that on the 3-4 side that we're doing now. This other one is also a good rocker. And we'll put it on the 3-4 side too. Look at the rocker shafts, intake rocker shafts. Pick the one that's the better of the two. And I think this one here is the better of the two. You look at the shaft, not the middle aluminum piece. Okay, and we'll grab this. You arrange it in front of you so that the short end, there's a short end here and a long end, so the short end's on your left-hand side. Helps to do this where you won't worry about getting crud on things. And you get out 2 shims, 2 springs, clean them off. The right arrangement is washer, spring, washer. Get out another spring. There's a washer already on there. So it goes washer, spring, washer, and the intake rocker. But before that, we put a little dab of our secret sauce on both sides. Take the intake rocker, stick it over, make sure it spins freely. If it doesn't, try the other rocker stand. Like so. Maybe tight getting on, but once it's on, it should spin freely. Now another shim and cap, one of the caps. Put the cap on. You sometimes have to tap it with something. Your hand usually works. Put another shim on this side and a cap on this side. Take the rocker, set it over the studs, push on the caps inwards, rotate a little bit, wiggle, rotate. Get the cups of the rocker adjustment screws over the push rods. Push it down. Go to the better of the 2 short exhaust rockers. This one here is pretty good. Get out the best of the short rocker shafts. That one there is pretty good. Clean it off. Now if there are score marks on it, we're going to rotate it so a new virgin area is going to be used as the bearing surface. Again, the arrangement is washer, spring, washer. These are shims actually. Secret sauce. Short rocker with the adjustment end towards you. Right. Okay, do the long one then. Let's try this one. We'll find this buddy yet. This is why it really helps put everything together so that this is probably the hard one. The one that's very difficult getting off. It's difficult getting on too. We can use the same technique though as before. Put it on. They're usually distorted from people over clamping the nuts that hold the rocker to the rocker shaft. And that's why we're having some difficulty here. So what we do is take the next best rocker. There's the next best rocker. Goes shim, spring, shim, secret sauce. See if this one goes on a little better. Tap, 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 tap. Okay, we'll get out our special installer and our special tool necessary for doing installation. Tap it a few times. Once it gets beyond the point of distortion here, then it goes on very well and spins very nicely. Make sure that the area that's worn is up on top facing you, like so. Put the other washer and the cap on. You can tap those too to get them on. Do a triple check on the crud, or any score marks here. Make sure there's no crud. Make sure the rocker rotates fairly freely. And the exhaust rockers, the short ones, only go on this side. I mean, one to a side. Put the cup in, like so. We'll deal with the long exhaust rocker now. Find out which exhaust rocker wants to go through. Looks like the previous clown before us really torqued these things down. There we go. We'll use this one, clean it off. It goes, again, shim, wash, spring, shim, spring, shim, secret sauce, exhaust rocker. And again, we may have to use our technique, like so. And again, once it goes in, it usually stays in. Occasionally the other end will come off. Now it's really slippery. So just put the cap back on. No big deal. Get another shim. Clean everything off. Another cap. Little love tap. And put this one on. This is the exhaust rocker for, in this case, number 3 cylinder. A few taps with your hands usually to align it. Sometimes that doesn't work, so you have to take it off and realign it. There we go. Put the cup in. Okay, now we go and get the saddle washers, the special saddle washers to fit over the intake rocker stand and the stand here, and the special nuts, and I'll show you them. Be here in a second. Okay, take the special saddle shape washer, put over the rocker arms like so. There are 6 of these special saddle shape washers on each side, 12 total. And then the same type of washer, regular washer, spring washer, that's used on the third piece, a smaller OD style 8mm washer, is used on top of the saddle washers. And then very special thin 8mm nuts with standard thread. These nuts are different than the valve adjustment nuts. And though the valve adjustment nuts look the same and are very close, they are not the same. So don't use the valve adjustment nuts on the rocker for the rocker tie downs. Now, there's one place where you can get away with the big washer and the big regular 13mm nut. That's right here in the middle of the intake rocker stand. And actually the big nuts, regular 13mm nuts, will work. But factory use these thin ones. And I think you should also use these thin ones too. You must not over torque these thin ones or they will fail. That's why I like to use a wrench on them. You can torque them down to between 15 and 18 foot-pounds, but I think you're much better off going closer to 15 than you are towards 18. They tend to strip out at about 18 or so. So on the intake rocker stand, it's kind of best usually to torque down the middle nut and then go over to the outside ones and torque them down evenly. If you do one of the outside ones first and an intake rocker happens to be open, then you can put kind of undue stress on the rocker stand, etc. So we tighten these down. We'll do both sides and we'll run through with the torque wrench at about 15 foot-pounds on all of these nuts. Get this one down here. You can, by cranking the engine over, get all the valves on one side so none of them are open or beginning to open. And that way you can torque all these down without fear of having to torque also the valve spring, which can really be a chore to do. So you get them all snug. You also make sure that the rockers hit the valve slightly off-center. The purpose of that is to allow the valve to rotate. When the rocker opens it, if it hits it slightly off-center, it'll induce a torque causing the valve to rotate as it opens. And that's supposed to be better than having the valve not rotate when it opens. All right, now we'll go to the other side. And don't forget now, we have to put the push rod. Torque wrench to 15 foot-pounds, and then torque all the nuts to 15. Now occasionally you'll strip a nut, especially a nut that's been CAD plated. The smaller, thin 13mm nuts tend to strip a lot. So if you do CAD plate these, you should have a few extras just in case, and these are special. So like I say, in an emergency you can use a regular 13mm nut. But if you're careful and torque them carefully and don't over torque them, they'll be okay. That's that side. And now we can do this side. I like to do both sides at once. That way you don't forget things. Come on, baby. That's it. All right, once they're all torqued down, which with a little bit of luck they will be, we can then go to the valve adjustment, which is next. All right, we're going to adjust the valves, and a neat trick on how to adjust the valves, how to find top dead center and all, is as follows. Watch the intake valve spring of number 1 cylinder, and this is the intake valve spring of number 1 cylinder, so watch this as I crank the engine over. Eventually, the intake valve spring will open. There it goes now. Pretty much fully compressed now. Now it's backing off. Bring it back to where it's just about off again. There's some gap. Then come to the pulley. And you'll see at this point that the OT for top dead center, OT could be German for on top, oben toppen or something. Keep cranking clockwise, and the OT mark will come up to the top eventually as you crank. Get it to the top, and now we're at top dead center on compression ignition on number 1 cylinder. And now what we do is with a 13mm wrench and a decent screwdriver, we go over here, wiggle the valves. One has a lot of gap, one has almost none. So we first start on the exhaust, loosen it up to where it has some gap. And then you can use one of 3 techniques here, the imprisoned feeler gauge method with a feeler gauge imprisoned here, memorize slot location where I memorize the position of the slot here as you adjust it, or the calibrated arm. And for an initial valve adjustment, I'll show you the calibrated arm technique. You can screw it down to where the screw gets tight and there's no gap, and back it back about 1/8 of an inch, 1/8 of a turn actually. Wiggle it. You can feel that's too tight. Back it a little bit more. That's just about right. You can actually see about 6/1000ths. We'll check these with the feeler gauge, of course, to make certain. But if you've done this enough times, you can get the feel of what a 6/1000th gap should be like. And just to show you how close I can come, I'll first adjust it by hand and then use the feeler gauge on it and check it that way. Alright, intake valve the same way. Now, during break-in, or when you first fire the engine up, it is much better to have the valves too loose than too tight. And I found that about 7 or 8/1000ths on both the intake and the exhaust is the best way to fire up a new engine. That way you're assured of having sufficient gap on both valves. And after the initial oil change at 30 miles, 300 miles, and 1200 miles, after each oil change you go back and readjust the valves, creeping up on the correct adjustment each time. Correct adjustment is 4/1000ths, saith the book, on the intake and 6 on the exhaust. But I like to use 5/1000ths on the intake and 6 to 7 on the exhaust. Now, if you have alloy cylinders, which we don't, we have cast iron cylinders, factory reversed these setting where they had 6/1000ths on the intake and 4 on the exhaust. But I never like to see 4/1000ths on the exhaust, much rather see 6. And the intake, if you have 4 or 6, doesn't make a hell of a lot of difference. So I like to adjust the intakes to about 5 and the exhaust to 6 or 7. So anyhow, we will adjust this, and that seems to be about right. A little bit on the loose side on that one. But we'll readjust these things after fire up. Crank the engine 180 degrees counterclockwise so we can do number 2 cylinder, and then the OT mark will be down at the bottom. In fact, if you note, with a 4-hole pulley, there's a hole opposite. Here's the OT mark. There's a hole opposite the OT. You can either make a little notch or just line the timing mark of the case up with the middle of the hole that's opposite the hole where the OT is. Okay, and then go and do number 2 cylinder. And again, here we have an intake that's tight and an exhaust that's loose. Back off the intake till you get some gap. Get the nut up against the adjustment. Wiggle back and forth. Tighten down the nut. Use your calibrated arm. Yeah, it's not too bad. We'll check these, like I say, with a real feeler gauge and see how close we've come to the actual gap. But I found that when you play with these for a long time, you can get real close with a calibrated arm. If you're out in the boonies someplace and you have a problem or the valves get tight for some reason, you got no feeler gauge, you'll have to use your calibrated arm. So it comes in handy for many things. Like if the batteries fail on the calculator these days, people just don't know how to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Those of us who are raised on slide rules and the multiplication division tables will find that you're at a big advantage sometimes and their calculator batteries go out. Okay, get the number 2 cylinder done. Crank the engine counterclockwise again until this time the OT mark comes up and aligns with the notch in the 3rd piece. You can rotate the engine stand and then go off and do number. Okay, now we're going to see just how well the Maestro did by his calibrated arm. You get out feeler gauges that span the range in 1,000 increments from 4 to 8, so that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8/1000ths. You make sure it's top dead center on number 1. The OT mark should be up. There should be valve gap on number 1 cylinder, which there is. Take the 4/1000ths feeler gauge, feed it in the intake, it fits in. Likewise on the exhaust. Take 5. 5 is getting somewhat snug. Not snug there. 6 is pretty snug. So the gap on the intake is 6/1000ths. Gap on the exhaust is going to be more than 6. 7 doesn't go in. Intake valve gap is 6. And 7 barely goes in here. Will 8 go in? No, 8 will not, unless you force it, go in. So exhaust gap is 7, intake gap 6. For break-in, that's fine. For normal adjustment, I like to see 6 or 7 on the exhaust and 5 or so on the intake. So the Maestro's calibrated arm is still calibrated. Check number 2. Crank the engine counterclockwise, 180 degrees, till the OT mark is down at the bottom. In fact, there's a circle up here at the top of the 4-hole pulley the topmost part of the circle lined up with the notch in the case is also 180 degrees out, or top dead center on number 2 cylinder. Go over the number 2 cylinder, intake and exhaust, put the 4 in, it fits in through both. The 5 is a little more snugly on the intake, but no problem on the exhaust. The 6 is tight on the intake, no problem on the exhaust. 7 won't go into the intake. So the intake gap here is 6. The exhaust gap is 8. All right, so he's off by 1/1000th of an inch on the exhaust valve gap. So we'll correct that, bring it back down to 7 or so. You loosen the rocker, the adjustment lock nut on the adjustment screw. That's going to be too tight. So you binary search on the slot position. That's still going to be too tight. So a little more that way. That's probably going to be too loose, so we'll check it out and see. 5 fits in, 6 fits in, well, let's go all the way up to 8. 8 fits in, so that's too loose. So now memorize the slot location there. Loosen it, bring it back clockwise like there. Tighten it down, feels better. Try 8. 8 won't go in. 7 will go in. 6 goes in easily, yes. The gap's about 7, that's where you want to be. Do the same thing, crank it counterclockwise again for the number 3/4 side. Bring the OT mark back up on top dead center. It's top there to the, bring the OT mark back up to match the notch in the 3rd piece. That's top dead center in number 3 cylinder. We can go over there and redo that, check the gap, make sure it's about 6 to 8 thousandths on both the intake and exhaust valve for fire up. We won't do that now, we've already done it. So next thing now is to put the valve covers on. And for the valve cover, best thing to use that I have found through multitudinous experience is the 3M Super Weather Stripping Adhesive. It's also known lovingly in the trade as Gorilla Snot because it has the look and consistency of what Gorilla Snot might actually look like. Okay? Take and wipe off the initial stuff that comes out of the tube, and then lay a bead, blows bubbles too, about 1/8 of an inch wide, all the way around. This takes some skill in squeezing the tube while you also maneuver the nozzle around. And usually after the first one you get better at it. Go over any area that has not enough. Stringy. Let it set for a few minutes. Do the other one. The curves are what the killers are here. Like so. Always put the cap back on immediately or you'll have to use a nail to unplug it. While it's giving a few seconds there, get your other bail out, CAD plated bail. Put it in the other side here. Okay. Take your WD-40 can and spray the valve springs, etc. If you're going to be firing the engine up, you can use WD-40. If you're going to be firing the engine up quickly, you can use WD-40. If you're going to be keeping it for a long time, pour oil on everything here. Spray both halves, both heads, around the valve springs, the valves, the rockers, etc. Now come back to your valve train, or your rocker covers here. Put the valve cover gasket in place. Now that the 3M snot has had a chance to evaporate a bit. Stuff really stinks, so it helps to do it in an open room, unless you like getting high on brain-destroying chemicals. Boy, that stuff is good. Jeez. Okay, you push the gasket around until the snot starts to harden. Try not to get too much of the Gorilla Snot on the top side of the gasket. That tends to stick to the head then. In fact, what you should do is spray some WD-40 on the sealing surface of the head itself so the Gorilla Snot won't stick to it. That way you can get everything off nicely. All right, things seem to be pretty good now. Make sure the gasket is sitting there well. Stick the valve cover in place, bring up the bail, tap it down a bit. Go over to the other side. Stick the valve cover on. Bring the bail up. Move it down a bit. You have just installed your valve covers. The engine is almost as pretty as it's going to be. We'll add the manifolds, the fuel pump, and the generator stand next. Show you how to put the distributor in properly and do everything else to it. Right now we're going to take a break. The fuel pump, generator stand. We're going to use a C912 fuel pump, so we need this type of insulator block. This is new from Stoddard. Not too expensive, about $5 or so. Note that it's not symmetrical. It goes on only one way. And you can test that out. That's the wrong way, so you want to put it on this way, which is the right way. You want to get out your Ford water pump sealer. Works well for this purpose too. And coat both sides of the insulator block. There is no gasket between the insulator block and the case. It is in fact its own insulator block is its own gasket. So you put some mucilage on both halves, both where it's going to seal against the case and the fuel pump. And then you put it back on, making sure you put it on the right way. You get out your brand new fuel pump, C912 type here, come in a nice plastic bag. You also have to get out from your lower end gasket kit the O-ring seal that fits here on the new fuel pump. They don't provide that. Put the O-ring seal on, quite trivial. Get out some wheel bearing grease. Stick your finger into it. Oh, it feels so good. Put the wheel bearing grease around the spring and on the tip of the plunger. C912 pump is a much simpler pump and therefore lasts longer than the B or A type pump with all the monkey motion. Simply feed the pump in, push it so the seal goes through. And you can use 12 or 13 millimeter nuts. I like 13 because you can always use a 1/2-inch wrench on it. If you use 12, there's not much American wrenches that are out in the boonies you can borrow. Put the 13 millimeter nuts on. Of course, when you're out in the boonies, you carry your own complete toolkit, especially if you're going cross country in a 356 or 912. The cross country toolkit is described in both Secrets of the Inner Circle and the Maestro's spec and breakdown book. It includes all the parts and tools necessary to do almost every repair short of a complete overhaul while on the road. And it can save you a lot of time and hassle if you broke down in Podunk, Iowa, missing a clutch cable or something of that nature. You won't find too many 356 parts in the great vast Midwest. They're found mainly on the coast in Texas and Illinois, and of course where all of the old 356s go to die in California, the great Porsche burial grounds. Okay, you get the nuts snug, but don't over tighten them or you will break the insulator block. And then you have a nice new pump, CAD plated parts on the screws and everything, and nice aluminum, shiny aluminum. You can take hours trying to clean up an old one. And that's the pump. Next step, while we're here, is to put on the generator stand. You get out the generator stand gasket, oval-shaped gasket like that, the lower end gasket kit. Get out your mucilage, put a thin layer. Oh, and incidentally, you should clean off the excess mucilage off the fuel pump. We'll do both of clean up both the fuel pump excess and the generator stand excess after we put on the generator stand. So also coat the generator stand, the bottom of same, with the Ford water pump sealer, like that. Now, this gasket also goes on only one way, and it won't go on that way. You have to turn around like this. It goes on that way there. Now I brought, just in time here, 4 special bolts that are needed to tie down the generator stand. I've selected Cairo. I don't have enough K-Max ones, as they're the Cairo. 14 millimeter across the flat, and we need the wide washers for them. and we happen to have 4 wide washers here, easily available. Use the best ones of the bolts on the front, that it's the most visible. Put in all 4 at first, screw them down a few turns. You sometimes have to rearrange things here a bit to get both the gasket and the stand lined. Murphy tries to make you miss the holes. If you give up, just take off the generator stand like so. Carefully set it down from the top, and we'll find these holes here. There we go. Use the next best one on the, well, actually the rear of the engine. Rear is towards the rear of the bumper. Front of the engine is towards the front bumper. Earlier 356s had studs here, not bolts, but they eventually wised up and decided it took less time to put a stud in and a nut than it did to put a bolt in. So they changed everything over to bolts after about 1961. If it did have studs, they take 14mm across the flat nuts. Okay, get everything screwed in a turn or two. Get out your 14mm wrench. Yep. Get out your 14mm wrench. And then tighten them all down till they're almost snug. Go to the next one. Don't lean on these too much when you're torquing them down. You can torque them to 15 to 18 foot-pounds. Of course, you have to use a calibrated arm on the right front one, simply because you can't get a torque wrench in there to torque them down. This isn't very critical anyhow. Generator stand just has to be tight, not held in by King Kong like torque. So we'll tighten this down now. Incidentally, you guys that do have 356 and 912 Porsche engines, the Maestro's database of over 2,000 engine numbers, of engine ID number, case casting number, type number, and the date stamp that we showed you on the inside of the main case halves is very important. It correlates to the internal parts and when they made important changes in the internal parts, and that way you can tell from external numbers what internal goodies your engine has inside. So I really appreciate it if you'd send in your engine ID number, case casting number, type number, and if you do have a car, then of course your chassis number. And from the database, it's now so good that we can get down to the fiscal week your engine was made simply by looking at any of the ID numbers or the case casting number. And we'd also tell you what all the internal goodies are in your engine. If you want to find out for yourself, the new versions of Secrets of the Inner Circle has in the back of it 32 pages of engine database. And that way you can tell for yourself what your engine is, or if you go see at a swap meet engine or engine for sale, or your buddy's car or whatever, you can tell him what he's got. Now don't forget too, there's a 3-piece match number that's on this case half, the main third piece here, and back on the flywheel, either side of the split. And all 3 pieces must have the same 3-piece match number. If they don't, then the third piece has been changed and the engine ID number won't tell you really what the main case halves are. But the case casting number always will tell you what the engine is, because that's on the main case half. If you don't have a case casting number here, it's probably a replacement case. And there are other ways of telling then, based on the characteristics of the engine. Okay, generator stands on. You can polish this up if you want to, make it look really nice. Next step, we'll put the heater boxes on. The ones we took off, though they are the same ones. Powder paint's a wonderful process. Well, if we get a chance, we'll show it to you. We select the one for this particular side here, which is this one. And we put a bolt, 6mm bolt with washer through to hold the 2 pieces together. Do it loosely. Take one of your 4 exhaust manifold gaskets in the top end gasket set, put it over the studs of the number 3 cylinder. Take your heater box, bring it around. Now the heater box fits on the inside of this big fin here, and it should plop up, go over the studs, and come up fairly snugly. Now occasionally we'll have to do a little bit of maneuvering here to get this bolt hole to line up, but that's easily done. Then get out 12mm across the flat nuts. That's the right ones to use on the heater system. That way you can get it off again pretty easily. Pick two nice ones, put the nicest one on the top, manufacturer's logo to the outside. Screw it on. Put the less nice one on the lower stud. Sometimes this thing will plop off, but really not too hard to put back on again. Sometimes the studs are kind of long and hit against the heater box, but you can get them on by moving the heater box towards the front, toward the flywheel a bit. Okay, you got that on. Need a 12mm wrench, since you've wisely selected 12mm nuts. Tighten down the top one till it's somewhat snug, but not overly tight. Get everything arranged, go underneath, and tighten down the other one. Now sometimes you can't get the box end in, you have to use the open end. And sometimes your engine stand will try and get away from you, so you just got to keep that from happening. Okay, you have to find your favorite wrench for this. I've gone through a few of these. In fact, you sometimes have to alternate from wrench to wrench simply because it's so hard to get in there with the heater box and everything else in the way. But eventually, if you try long enough and hard enough, you can get a wrench in there to fit. It's a tight fit. You can't possibly get a socket in there, of course. You must use a wrench, but alternating with the open end and the box end, we usually do it. I'm going to get it somewhat snug here. Make sure the heater box is coming up. Now we should be able to manipulate things, yes. Now, of course, if you're doing an overhaul and you have a bad stud, either one that's rusted off or broken off or whatever, the machine shop is the right place to have that replaced. You can try the double nut technique to get it out, but sometimes that won't do anything. At the machine shop, they can take and weld a nut onto the stud, let it cool, and then with a wrench you can back that stud out, I guarantee you. And occasionally we have to do that with studs. That's a good technique too if you're taking the head off and you found the previous idiot had stripped off one head. They leave off the head nut washers. The stud can protrude so far through the head nut, especially the small ones, that you can't get the wrench in there. The wrench will actually round off the internal hex of the nut. And then you have to cut the stud with a hacksaw, or you get the head off. And how do you get the stud out? Well, it's fairly simple. You take a 13mm nut or any nut that will fit over that, the remaining part of the stud, and weld it to the stud. And then just back it off with a wrench. And that's one way of dealing with bad studs either in the case or in the head. Okay, that's up there pretty well. We will now go around the other side. Take your other exhaust manifold gasket, the second one of 4. Put that on the head, like so. Feed the J-tube heater box combination up, over, and onto the studs. Get out 2 more 6mm nuts. Use the better one for the top. These are both pretty good. That's good. Mark of excellence. Incidentally, 12mm across the flat nuts are found on, as I said before, a lot of Japanese cars. So they're readily available now. They weren't for a long time, but they are now. It's a 14mm across the flat nuts used for the case perimeter bolts that are extremely difficult to locate anywhere. And those are pretty much limited to getting them off old Porsche engines. So next time you're at a swap meet, it's a nice idea to stock up on nuts and bolts and things. Now some guy has the remains from an engine, just the hardware he can't get much for, offer him $5 or $10 for it. And believe me, that'll come in handy. And here we go, a turn at a time, or actually about a quarter turn at a time, is about all you can do on some of these lower studs. But it will get tight eventually. Just bear with it. Like I said, J-tubes and double flapper heater boxes are most in demand. A good J-tube is hard to find. But don't throw away any J-tubes because they can be repaired. We have exhaust pipes that are the right size to repair J-tubes whose can is okay or salvageable, but whose pipe, exhaust pipe, is wiped. We can fix them for you in case you need them fixed, and we have a fairly decent supply of them. Okay, get things pretty snug here. You don't want to have an exhaust leak from a loose nut. Happened to a gentle reader who drove a 356 across the country to the East Coast Porsche parade in '86, and as soon as he crossed the Nevada border, he ended up with an exhaust leak. All right, so now's a good time to go back through and clean off all the mucilage. It's on both the generator stand and around the fuel pump. We want none of this sealing material to show. Next up is the intake manifolds, plugs. We can put the sheet metal on. It goes pretty fast now. And if you let me go get the sheet metal, I'll be back in a moment. Okay, now we're going to put the intake manifolds on. For that we need Solex intake manifold gaskets, so we hog the heads out to match. 2 long bolts for the Solex manifold or the Zenith manifold for the middle right here. 4 nuts. I use 13mm across the flat. They're convenient and the spark plug gets past them. 4 small washers for the nuts and 4 big washers with thicker flat washers underneath the spring washers. These are Solex manifolds, intake manifolds, without the manifold studs. The reason for that is we're going to put Webers on this engine, and to do that you need an adapter plate. If you're going to use 40 Webers, you should use the Solex manifolds with the adapter plate. The adapter plate screws into these stud holes. So to get the studs out of the Solex manifold, you take 2 nuts and tighten them against each other and then back out the stud on the lower nut. And that usually works. If these manifolds aren't nice enough for you, you can paint them up with aluminum paint, like you can do the case. Technique is to spray some aluminum paint on after these are clean, of course. Then take a rag or paper towel and go over them, and that way it cuts the glare of the quote chrome aluminum paint and just allows the paint that gets in below the surface area and the pores and crevices to show through, and that makes for a fairly nice job. Looks like a nice aluminum manifold. But we're honest today, so we won't paint these. You grab the Solex manifold gaskets, and you don't have to use any mucilage on them unless you want to. I normally don't. That way they come off pretty easily. And you put the Solex manifold gaskets on both sides. You simply take the Solex manifolds, set them on the gasket. They go on this way, of course, and they're identical manifolds. Take the washers and studs and arrange them as I described, with the small outside diameter washer over the studs, and then a flat washer and spring washer for the long bolt. Screw the long bolt in a way to get it started. Put on a couple of nuts, using 13mm across the flat nuts here. The long bolt, this one for the manifolds, should be a 14mm across the flat. For 356s, 912s use a 13mm across the flat bolt. So you can usually reach the other side, just get them on loosely. And we'll go back and get our wrench out. 13 and 14mm socket in this particular case. If you use 14mm across the flat nuts here, they tend to interfere with the spark plugs. And again, 14mm across the flat nuts are getting quite hard to find and should not be used in areas where you really don't see them. You should save them for the case perimeter bolts. So torque the nut down till it's snug. Change sockets to the 13. Torque the 13 down alternately. Watch the oil cooler, don't hit it with a wrench. You don't want to have any operator-induced faults like Chernobyl. Tighten down the nuts till they're snug. Get out the torque wrench. Again, 8mm nuts are torqued to between 15 and 18 foot-pounds. Zero the wrench. I like to see 17, happy medium. Torque. 2, 3, 4. Change the socket to the 14 millimeter. Sneak up on it. 1, 2. You just installed the intake manifolds. Now, we're about ready to put the sheet metal on. If you want to now, you can put the plugs in. If you want to wait for the proof test, you can put the sheet metal on and try and put the plugs in through the sheet metal. However, I know that that'll work. So, get out your spark plugs. I like to try the Bosch Platinum plugs on these things, but so far we haven't had a Platinum plug that works. So if you are stuck for plugs, the right type of plug, the ones I like to use, are a W200 or 225 T35. That's the old number. It has the extended tip plug, tends to advance the spark a bit. On Super 90s, I have a supply of the T7, which are the side electrode. Very neat plugs, and I'll show you them maybe before this tape is over with. Anyhow, almost all Bosch plugs used to come with the cap already on, which you have to take off to use the spark plug wires Porsche uses. The new plugs now come with the cap separate, and that saves you a few seconds. You don't have to take the cap off. I like to feed the plug in by hand. That way you avoid any possibility of cross-threading the thing. And believe me, a cross-threaded spark plug is something you don't want to have happen. Now these go at a slight angle. They don't go in straight. You're going to match the angle just right. Let's try this side here. I like to do number 3, 4 initially. That way if you get them in, everything else will go in pretty well. Although it's always the last spark plug you come to that will be the one that won't go in. And of course you need your spark plug wrench to tighten them down with. You can torque them, or you can just use a calibrated arm, but don't overdo it. This is an aluminum head. And aluminum heads don't like to have spark plugs that are over-torqued. So you can do all these at once if you want to, or you can do one at a time. Take off the little cap. Don't ask me why they put these things on the first place, when most of the plugs they sell, the little cap comes off. Nowadays, like I say, the cap is separate, loose in the box. Take it all off. You can feed the plugs in by hand to the other side here. Try and get the angle right. There we go. Now, if you pardon me while I go get the spark plug wrench, I'll be back in a second. Okay, the type of spark plug wrench you'd like to have is one that either has a rubber insert for gripping the plug nicely, or a magnetic spark plug wrench that'll also grip the plug by being magnetic. I have the rubber insert type. It's available in the cheap Taiwanese sets and all. I'd rather have the magnetic type, and I've got one, but it keeps hanging around some things. Being magnetic, it tends to hang up on various bits and pieces. So tighten the plug down, now that you've got them screwed in slightly, by hand. And don't overdo it. Use a calibrated arm technique, or if you want a torque wrench, and torque them down. Of course, the factory wrench that comes in the toolkit for the car actually works pretty well. A little awkward. You have to put a screwdriver through it to turn it, or a T-type handle, but it'll work. And now if you want to check out compression, you can rotate the engine around, and you'll see it'll have compression. Because your plugs are in, your valves are working, and if we had fuel and spark, we could fire it. This is going to be a pretty nice engine. All 4 holes are working very nicely. All right, finally, we come time now to do the sheet metal. And very quickly, in a short time here, it'll really look like a Porsche engine. So let's get out the powder painted sheet metal. I'll be right back. Okay, here we have the powder painted sheet metal. Just came back from the powder painters. You can see how nice it is. It's powder painted even on the edges. It's almost like a plastic coating of the part. And it certainly is a lot better than what it was when we first took it to the sheet metal powder painters. It was chemically stripped of rust, grease, and paint, and then of course the powder paint technique was applied to it. Well, what we'll do now, we can pan up to the engine. You can see how we have the super shroud painted in a gray-silver combination. We've got the generator all cleaned up with steel wool. You can polish it too, but that's not overly necessary. Put on a new center section for the generator. The other one's kind of worn. The way to put this on is just put the fan shroud and generator combination on, put the nuts in loosely, then once you get everything kind of arranged, tighten down the 6mm bolts that hold the generator to the fan housing. That way, if you tighten them down evenly with the generator on its stand, it tends to arrange things a little better if you just torque down the generator on the fan shroud without it being on the engine. Get them fairly snug. This particular bolt here is covered up by the oil filter can strap and bracket, so you can use an ugly one there if you want to. Make sure the generator spins freely, which it does. Make sure the fan shroud is down. And then we have a 3-holer exhaust cutout here. That goes on this side. Hole should align. The other 3-holer exhaust cutout here goes on this side. We have a 1-holer which goes in the back, actually the front. You can tap it down. Sometimes I have to twist a few small things. Right there. And we have a 2-holer, referring to number of holes in the horizontal piece. And that goes on the right front, across cylinder number 1. We then have a fuel pump shroud, which of course goes over the fuel pump. A dipstick shroud, which you have to put on first before you put the breather can on, or you'll be sorry. That goes on yay. Now we also have to put on our CAD-plated bracket that holds everything, and we happen to have that here. This thing here. We get out a couple of decent, but not great, because you don't really see this, 6mm bolts. Attach that to the case. You don't tighten the bolts all the way down, you just put them in hand tight, because you have to adjust the bracket sometimes to get the attachment screws through the dipstick shroud and the cylinder shroud. Also, the dipstick shroud goes on top of the cylinder shroud. I've seen many engines where the dipstick shroud went underneath the cylinder shroud. Now obviously they've been overhauled. Okay, thing to do now, we'll put the nuts and bolts on in the proper way. The 6mm bolts, of course, go on the vertical surfaces, and that's what we'll put in. So we get out some K-rows. That seems to be the brand of choice here these days. And put 4 of them on both front and back. There's another K-row, like so. I like to use new 6mm washers. When you use all of them new, they really make for a nice combination. You put on the bolts loosely first. Just screw them in hand tight. And that way you can get everything fitted, all the sheet metal fitted. If you tighten one down, of course, then you might find you have to go back and loosen it to make everything fit. So just finger tight on some of these. Now the side vertical pieces, you can use one of 2 types. If you're using Solex intake manifolds, you can use Solex intake manifold split side vertical pieces. But if you only got Zenith, you can also use the Zenith sheet metal pieces. And I can show you how you do that. It involves a little cutting or trimming of the Zenith sheet metal piece. And they'll still fit on. You got to bend them a little bit, but it's really not a big deal. Okay. Now we put in the 6mm screws, and it helps to have a 6mm self-tapping screw with a little cutout there. That's for those hard to get to 6mm screws where you just don't want to go in right, or you can barely get the screw through the hole. Use them. I don't like to see them because the washer that they have trapped within them is a slightly different thickness and outside diameter than the washer that we normally use loosely, the loose washers that fit over the 6mm bolts. Consequently, at the Concours, I usually take a point or a quarter point off for every one of those I see, but like I said, this is not a Concours engine. For one, it's CAD 2 plated, not CAD 1. And most judges, to be honest, at the Concours won't know the difference, but I do. So you get me for a judge, and you got those kind of screws there, and I noticed them. You'll find that you may get docked a few points because they aren't original. Factory didn't use self-tapping screws. They use a separate non-self-tapping screw that I'm using here and a separate washer. Now at this point, it also helps to put rags or any paper towels, whatever, into any open hole that leads down inside the engine, like the intake manifolds or here, the oil filler can. Prevent any wayward screw or nut, bolt, washer, whatever, from falling down inside. We're not doing that right now because we're, of course, incredibly careful, and this never happens to us. Aha. Get the ones in the front of the engine too. You sometimes have to use a screwdriver as a pry bar with one hand, feed the screw into the slot with another, and with the third hand tighten it down. It does help to have three hands. That's what some of these things are designed for. Incidentally, if you have any comments about the videotape or things you'd like to see in it or like to see removed from it, drop us a line. If it's not too obscene, we'll read your letter. We'll diffuse all letter bombs. Screw all these screws in just not overly tight, just mildly tight, so that you can go back later on when everything is adjusted and screw them down tight. See, the nice thing about powder paint is that it doesn't affect the screw holes too much anymore because the powder paint really can't get inside a screw, because inside a closed metal object the field is everywhere zero. So there's no charge allowing the particle of paint to get inside, and consequently it can't, ideally. Okay, let's get the dipstick shroud taken care of. This can be a real bear, or the fuel pump shroud taken care of. This is kind of hard to get to, but you put the screw down through the middle bracket or middle hole of the fuel pump shroud. You can then usually get the screw to take and go in. Sometimes it helps to take the other screws out of your hand to do this. And when you do that, you're usually rewarded by the screw actually going in place. I use a medium screwdriver to get the screws aligned in loosely, and then the big goody to really do it upright. This is a tricky one too. You've got to balance. There are little screwdrivers that attach the screw to the screwdriver, so you can actually put it in a lot easier. They usually work pretty well, but two I've tried from Sears both kind of failed in about a year or so, so I'm not too enthused by them. Get one more of these. Make sure when you put the washers on, the bevel side is showing, not the sharp edge side. Sometimes helps on this one to lift the heater box up to accept the screw, or use a longer screw. Or a self-tapping one. But perseverance usually pays off, and we usually get it. Okay, let me go out and show you the side vertical pieces and what to do to them. Okay, the Zenith side vertical shroud has a little cutout here, a little jog. This jog will interfere with the Solex air cleaner intake manifold. You won't be able to get it over Solex intake manifold. So what you have to do is cut that out, either on a grinder or with a pair of tin snips. And you actually have to bend this area up, sort of vertically to clear also, and then bend it back down after it's down, and the reverse of that to get it off again. That way you can use your Zenith side vertical shrouds on Solex intake manifolds. Okay, so let us put them on now. I did notice that this one part of the fan shroud is bent a little bit, so we can screw in a little bolt like this and bend it back the other way, and it'll straighten it out pretty nicely. I have two of the Zenith side vertical shrouds have already been massaged like that. All you have to do now is take a pair of pliers, bend this up, don't be afraid, the powder paint usually won't crack, even if it does. The side horizontal pieces go on top of this, and you put it on, get it aligned, whack it down there a little bit, get it over the cylinder shrouds in the front, like that. Get it over the cylinder shrouds in the rear, like that. And then usually, our example bolt, okay, it will go down. You sometimes have to help it out. But it will usually, there it is, usually go down like that. And you take a screwdriver and bend this back flat again. Flat of your hand sometimes helps. Until it's flat. Likewise on this one. If you have 4 Zenith cylinder shrouds, 2 of which you don't need for anything, you can cut them and make them into Solex cylinder shrouds, side vertical shrouds, but you still have the problem, you have to cut out the inside section. Okay. Now the side horizontal shroud with the curve is always at the front, kind of narrower at the front, so you always put this on. This is the left-hand side one. The other, of course, would be the right-hand side one. And here's where those self-tapping screws really do play a role. You squeeze everything in, and here's where 3 hands really play a role too. You try and get the holes to line up. Usually that means putting the screwdriver through the spark plug hole, prying one out as you push the other one in, and then trying to get things lined up enough and hold it to where the self-tapping screw can actually do its job. And if you're really lucky, it'll work out. Sometimes it may take 10 or 15 minutes to fit all this stuff together, especially if you're doing sheet metal from a random engine, or random sheet metal on an engine. Usually if you use the same sheet metal that came off the engine, it'll go on with a minimum of fuss and bother. But if you're using sheet metal that is random off different year engines, you can have sometimes occasional difficulty. So you have to fight it. Once you do succeed, though, it's a great feeling to get that screw home. Again, don't tighten it all the way down yet. And if you recall that I was saying on the side horizontal screws, that hold the side vertical piece to the fan shroud, they're special. They're a 6mm bolt with a screwdriver slot. And of course, the Maestro has them, and he uses them because that's what the factory used. And they go right in here. It's the only place that these are normally used on, although I've seen some 912s where the guy who was assembling the engine used nothing but these particular type screws, because that way you could use either a screwdriver or a bolt, a wrench on them. I wonder what the supervisor thought of that. Okay, we take the other side vertical piece and the side horizontal piece and go to this side, take our pair of pliers and bend up the bottom part of this, put it over, see if we have, oh, look at that, boy, it just snaps right in, hey. Take the screwdriver, make flat the piece you bent up, like that. Take the side horizontal piece and two, you're going to use one of these self-tapping screws on a side like this. You may as well use two of them. It makes it look symmetrical then. May even pass the Concord judge's scrutiny because it's kind of hard to see anyhow. Okay. George, there's one. This other one, though, may be a bit of a problem. There's always one in the crowd that makes life difficult for you. But if you stick it out and try and do the best job you can, Porsche gods usually understand that and eventually give in, let you assemble your engine. Okay, they're both started. Again, on this side, we get out the special 6mm bolt with the slot in it. Put the washer on properly and attach it to the fan housing. Now, all the sheet metal screws and bolts are in place, so it's time to go back around and tighten them all down with your big motor screwdriver. If you want good exercise, almost like isometrics here, it is a good exercise. Build your muscles and build your engine too. Such a deal. This isn't terribly exciting, so if you know any good jokes, I'd be happy to hear them now. Any good jokes? And this is beginning to look like a Porsche engine. In fact, it's beginning to look like a somewhat nice Porsche engine. You got the clutch to go and the sump underneath that we really should have put on beforehand, but the sump can go on almost any time. Just we can't get a photogenic view of putting it on right now, but we'll try. But you see what little powder paint does to the engine really makes it stand out nicely. I'll get this one side down so you get the idea. And I'll put the coil generator bracket, or the cooler bracket, oil filter bracket on for you, and then tighten these things down. You don't have to watch that side again. Here's the oil filter can bracket. It actually goes on like this. This part covers that bolt I was talking about. And to put it on, you need two very large washers go on the front of the fan shroud, a long bolt, actually two long bolts, the other one I used for adjusting the fan shroud, and a bracket, two brackets, L-shaped bracket, metal bracket, and a band that actually holds the fuel line. It goes on the front of the fan housing. So what we do here is we put these on the front, so put them over in the front area. We also have washers on after that. Put them in the front area so we can get to them. Take the bolt, put it through. There's no washer on this side. Wiggle around until it goes through the other hole in the front of the fan housing. Put on one of the thick washers. Put on one of the regular washers. Get out some nice new 6mm bolts. Get out another washer that just fell off, replace the one that fell off. Transfer. Put on your bracket. Goes on like that. You can slop around a little bit right now, but when we tighten it down, it should be facing upwards. That supports the fuel line. And you need support because it has a flexible piece in the middle. Get the bracket that holds the oil filter can like that. You tighten it down, and it's not in this little groove here. You'll be redoing it to get it in this little groove. Put the other bolt through the fan housing. Sometimes they're a little snug. Actually, in this case, I think the bracket's a little snug. There. The other large bolt, washer, goes on the front. This time you just need a regular washer, 6mm washer, and a nut. Don't tighten it down yet, just put it on snugly because, let's put it on loosely actually, because we have to put the coil on. Get out your Bosch 6 or 12 volt coil, depending on what voltage your engine is. This is the ugly one I don't like very much. It's got a cutout here and a cutout here, but that's the way they come anymore. The old style bracket just had a hole there and a hole there. It was much better. The only advantage of this is you can get this bracket on loosely. Yes, and loosely. And then push that underneath like so. But don't let go of it. It'll fall on the ground and generally smash itself and make a mess of the coil you just bought. And these coils aren't cheap. They cost about $17, $18, $19. So what you have to do is get another 6mm bolt, put it in here, have your socket handy, because this one you want to tighten down to hold the coil. Force upwards on the coil to get the washer to grip everything right. Tighten down the 6mm bolt so you can finally let go of the coil, being held by the one bolt. Get out a 10mm across the flat wrench. Hold the one nut in front, fan housing. Tighten down this one. Arrange the bracket. It's going to hold the fuel line to be vertical. Keep it that way. Tighten this one down. Now don't overdo it, because the cooler's right there. If you over tighten the fan shroud down, you distort and mess up the cooler. All right, brackets in place, coils in place. Next step is the fuel oil filter and the various lines used to attach it, then the distributor, and then finally put the Webers on, the adapter plate, etc. But as you see now, it's beginning to become a Porsche engine. So while you go have a beer, I'll stay here and work and screw the rest of the screws down, and maybe sneak a beer in between. Okay, have fun. Oil filter bracket, coil in place. Now, to leave no part unplated, we take out the fitting in the case. It feeds oil to the junction block and then it's the filter. We'll replate them. Voila, they're replated. We take the new copper gasket, put that over the fitting, put the fitting back into the case, like so. Tighten the fitting down. Don't let the wrench slip off the nut, or you can ding up the hex, which will usually ding up where the copper gasket fits. Oil junction block goes on next. But first the copper gasket, copper washer, goes on, like so. Oil junction block pointing in that direction, followed by a kind of funny, very small copper washer, followed by a cad plated hex nut that the oil pressure idiot light switch screws into. It's also 17mm, as so. We tighten it down. Then we find a 12mm wrench and our brand new oil lines. And with the oil lines go a CAD plated oil line attachment. And we take 2 aluminum washers that come in the lower end gasket kit, put one on the bolt. This hollow bolt is hollow, got a hole through the middle, got a little oil outlet line there that is what regulates your oil flow to your oil filter can. Put that through the oil filter line, inlet line, put the other aluminum washer on, and tighten that down loosely. Leave that like so for the moment. Here is your return line from the filter. You twist it around like this. Screw it onto the fitting we put in the case, all CAD plated. You can hardly see this since it's in front of the distributor, but the Porsche guys know if you plated it or not. I like to plate all the fasteners except the ones I mentioned, the case acorn nut washers and that sort of thing. Rod nuts, of course, don't get plated. Tighten it down fairly well. And now we can do any one of a number of things. For example, let us take the oil filter can, which we have here. We have to do that now. Oil filter can fits in like so. It's held by that bolt there. And that bolt there should be tightened down a bit. Now for the time being, we just let the filter can rest as it is until it gets sort of snug. And then we can arrange it. The best way to arrange it is to bring this inlet line up and screw it in slightly so we know where things are going to go. Now we should put the oil temperature sender in place here. Okay, take your VDO 6-volt temperature sender, put the special aluminum washer over it, stick it into the oil junction block, get out your 19mm wrench, that's what you need, tighten it down by hand as far as you can go, and get it snug, but not grossly over tight. Now's a good time to put an idiot light switch. It's a VW. Pretty trivial. Just screw it in until it kind of snugs down. It's a pipe thread, supposedly, so you don't have to screw it in all the way, but sometimes some of these do require you screw it in quite a ways. This particular one being apparently one of those. This is the junction block and the gaskets thereon is the most likely spot for an oil leak to occur, second only to the oil filter can. So when you first fire the engine up, you have to check those areas for leaks. Okay, now we can attach everything to the filter can and get the filter tied down. So we put the oil inlet line here, screw it down just a little bit, get out our wrench we use to tighten the nut with on the bracket that holds the oil filter can in place. And we'll get it snug, and then we'll adjust the height of the can so that the inlet line is proper. That's a good time to do it is now. Put a little bit of a bend in this, but not too much. Give it room for thermal expansion and vibration, etc. And tighten down the oil filter can. And tighten it down pretty well, too. Because when you tighten down the nut of the filter can, you have to torque on it pretty good to get it to seal the cap. That cap, oil filter can cap, is under oil pressure, which in a good engine can be 50 or 60 pounds per square inch. That cap is about 3 inches, 4 inches in diameter. So there is a couple of 100 pounds on that. All right, 12mm wrench for the oil filter lines. Tighten them down. Don't overdo them or you can bend or break things. But you do want to get the ferrule inside. Ferrule inside, nice and snug, so there are no leaks. Now this is arranged. 14mm wrench will then tighten this nut down. You get it so it looks nice. And then tighten it down. Again, don't overdo it. You can strip out the junction block. At that point, bring your return line down. Feed the nut in carefully. Tighten it down. These are new oil lines, and it's a good investment. They're not much money. They run $5, $6, $7 each. They look really nice. And you really can't clean up nor plate your old oil lines. You're much better off buying new ones. There are some that have black rubber in here or in here. Avoid them like the Black Plague. Always remember black rubber equals Black Plague. And don't go near them with a 10-foot pole. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is get our oil filter can, and there's various brands, Mon and Fram, Purelator. You lubricate that with WD-40, stick it in. The gasket that comes in the oil filter can, or oil filter gasket here, sometimes will fit the lid. If you want to be certain, Stoddard Imported Cars has the right type of gasket. Let's see if this one will work. Looks like it actually might. You get it in. If it's too big, this area you're pushing down will keep popping up everywhere throughout. And it almost looks like this is too big, but once we get it into the groove, we find it's actually the right size, amazingly enough. So Mon makes fairly good filter can gaskets. Put the cap on, get out your CAD-plated bolt. It sometimes helps to put a washer on it. And one of the washers that holds the fitting here in the case is the same. So you can use it. And then you screw it down. You probably won't have a wrench for this, so you can use your universal adjustable metric wrench for that purpose. Universal adjustable metric wrench, rubber handle, what's left of it. And here, be careful when you tighten this down because you don't want to scratch the top of the oil filter can. This is powder painted in silver. Fan shroud's a little more gray. I like that combination. Now see here? That's why I told you should tighten that oil filter can wrench nut down enough, and we didn't quite do it. So we will rearrange it to where it's where we want it to be and tighten the bolt down a bit more. That way we can get the oil filter can top a little bit tighter. There we go. Like so. You can clean off the can or the sheet metal with WD-40, works very nicely, and a fairly clean rag. You get some indication of how nice the powder paint really is here when you do it that way. We'll do it at the end of the process too. While we're here, may as well tie down the generator, put the fan belt on, get out our powder painted generator strap with the CAD plated bolt. Take out the CAD plated bolt. The generator strap should go on such that the bolt goes that away, fans. So you put the strap on like this. Put it in this groove. It helps to do that. To start the bolt. Now the bolt should be 14mm across the flat, which this one is. This is Verbis. It's okay. It's a good brand. It works. And you tighten down the bolt, tighten down the generator to the generator stand. Again, the straps here, I like the powder paint, but you can CAD plate. On really nice engines, I gold plate them. You gold plate the same things the factory CAD plated. It's the same process, only using a better material, gold instead of CAD. And the net effect when you cab plate the bands and straps on the coil, filter can, generator, pulley, pulley nuts, and with one exception, this piece here you gold plate. You really can't beat it. It looks fantastic. Doesn't cost that much to do. A little over $200 more than just the CAD plating cost. So it's not terribly expensive, and gold, being a noble metal, means it never tarnishes, never corrodes. CAD will fade, gold won't. The only way to duplicate a gold-plated engine is to, in fact, gold plate it. Nothing else will work as well. Gold is a noble metal, only attacked by hot aqua regia, which is a 1 in 3 mixture of hydrochloric to nitric acids, which you usually don't find around automobile engines, so the gold will in fact stay there